All right, everybody, welcome back for this episode of New England Road Talk. My name is Conrad Leger from Environmental Partners, and I'm joined again by co-hosts Art Baker from Indus and Bobby Betsold from All States Materials Group. So we have a lot to talk about. It's been a while since we did one of these, and we've had a lot of lessons learned in 2021, a busy season with a lot of disruption in the construction industry. We have funding coming down the pipe from the federal level for a lot of different things. And so we just kind of wanted to go through and talk about some of our lessons learned this year, what's going on in the industry, and then get into setting up future episodes, because we want to revamp this thing over the wintertime, get and start distributing some information as things shut down and construction shuts down on the season. So with that, Art, what have you seen this season? What's your biggest takeaways, I guess?
Well, so the biggest takeaways, I mean, there were a lot of challenges this year. I think we've all talked about, of course, the COVID impacts, weather, shortage of labor force. And I think one of the biggest things going forward for next year, there's things we can't control, right? We can't control those things, but there are things that we can control. And that's getting bids out earlier, getting things out sooner in the process so that we can start to do the work earlier. This year in 2021, that weather hit, I think it was Bobby, June? June, July, the skies just opened up and it seemed like we were getting rain every second or third day. And it just had such a huge impact on delaying all the work, pushing it out further. And quite frankly, come the end of the year, you can't get to everybody and you get a backlog of work that you have to start, that next season. Then throw the labor force in and the COVID impacts, out of the blue, you might get a positive COVID test that puts a hole in your crew, for a short period of time and how you replenish that. Didn't happen too often to us, but it certainly can happen. So those impacts obviously hurt you pretty negatively. Looking forward, we have OSHA's new requirement for this next year with vaccination and testing. So that could have an impact. So again, just all these things that we really can't control too much can really have that negative impact. And the earlier in the season that we can get this work, put out there with bids and knowing what work exists, so we can get to it as soon as possible, would really be beneficial.
Yeah, I think I would call this past year there were so many uncertainties, there were so many moving parts. You looked, it was year 2 for us in a quote unquote COVID world. I think there was a lot of things that we figured out as an industry, like everybody, you kind of start to learn and adjust to it. But then there was kind of the things that hadn't happened in 2020 season. We started looking at supply chain issues and those aren't going anywhere. Obviously, we're all seeing the impact on that in every industry. So that's something going forward that I think, to your point, Art, trying to plan for this upcoming season, it's probably going to be one of the toughest planning off seasons that we've seen in a long time. We've heard it from Public Works about how they're looking at their winter maintenance and addressing supply on that side. Obviously, we're going to see it in our industry. So we've had this past season, which was a tough year, obviously, and there was certainly, I think we got back to there being work and being able to get out and work. But there's that backlog. There's a lot of those question marks going into this upcoming season, and on the funding one, that's a huge question mark. It's ironic and I guess a little frustrating that when we did our mid-season check-in, we were talking about, hey, hopefully we'll be back in a few weeks and do a session on funding and what's out there and available for funding, and we're talking about the infrastructure bill and ARPA and all those. Yet here we are now, and it's almost the end of the year. And we're still talking about, where are these at and what's coming and how can they be used? And I think, as much as anybody has been frustrated for how when we use this and where is it going and where can it be applied? So it's still just a lot of question marks and a lot of uncertainty as we go into the new season.
Yeah, to me, it's been a year of ups and downs, wins and losses, right? It's, at the beginning of the season, we were on lockdown. We didn't know how the construction season was going to go. And then we find out, all right, it seems like we're getting down into the lull of things and things are rolling smooth. Then we get all the weather and that puts construction at a lockdown, and, we get all the funding in place. That's a great win. And then, you move on and, there's the supply chain shortage and the cost inflation too. So yes, there's a bunch of funding coming into play, and there's a bunch of new revenue sources and areas where communities can be competitive on going for projects if they have plans in place. But cost of construction is going way up too. So it's again, as Art alluded to, starting to get your plans together for 2022 and beyond is going to be a key, because the sooner you get out those bids, the sooner you get your contracts in place. That's going to be helpful to kind of lock in your costs too, right? Bobby, I know you have some information about the cost of asphalt and what that's going to look like here potentially in 22. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so from a supply chain, we talk about obviously we're talking about roads, asphalt roads. Just since January of 2021, and I'll use Massachusetts, but every state has their price index, the asphalt index, and we're talking in 12 months that there's been a 25% increase in that price index for liquid asphalt. And that impacts the hot mix numbers. It impacts the preservation treatments. Then you flip to same thing, a diesel index. We all know cost of fuel has gone way up this year. The diesel index is up 40%. And when you start talking about trucking of materials, so that's all going to have a ripple effect. And Art, I think you mentioned, and we've certainly seen it, some of these early bids that are coming out, and when you compare the prices that are on some of these bid results versus this time last year, and significant increases. So while it's great to have additional funding, you don't even know if that additional funding is going to cover the cost increase that's going to come out. So you may end up actually spending more and not even being able to do the same amount of work potentially.
Right. And I would just caution, the couple bid openings that I've been to, the asphalt prices have gone up around 12 to 15%. And I think some more recently have gone up even higher than that. And I just caution everyone, that doesn't even include the asphalt adjustment that's probably going to occur, because most of these people that when the towns are putting their bids out, I think their liquid asphalt base that they're using is around 500 to 550 a liquid ton. And I think you just said it, that the December index, I believe, was over 600, right? And it looks like we might be
625 in Massachusetts.
625 in Massachusetts. So we might be headed to 700. So they'll, in addition to the 12 to 20% increase in the bid opening price, there'll be an asphalt adjustment on top of that.
So to me, when I look at it from the planning aspect, from the infrastructure asset management aspect of things, it's going to be really important for communities to get plans in place, right? Because if you have a plan in place, or you understand what your infrastructure network looks like, you can then tee up some of these funding opportunities that are going to become available that are specifically competitive. And it's going to, because of the cost increases on construction, it's going to become even more important to be competitive in those grant opportunities or funding source opportunities, because you're going to have to supplement, even if you get more money from the state or the federal level that's allocated towards you in your community, you're still going to need more money because the cost of construction is going way up. So to me, it just becomes even more important to put some of these plans in place.
Yep. And, I think in Conrad, when you look at, and obviously you're much more heavily involved in the infrastructure beyond just the roadways. But when you start looking at water, sewer, and those type projects, which, we know a lot of the ARPA funds, communities are looking at those type projects for it, and that the supply chain and the impact on those, when you're looking at pipe and you're looking at, structures and any of that type stuff, that's even more of an issue. I think, when we get into the road and the paving and we're talking about asphalt, we're talking about, concrete, we're talking about aggregates, those type things. For the most part, they're locally sourced. Yes, the base materials come in from elsewhere, but it's a lot of it's locally sourced. So there is some control and some, I guess some certainty that at least we're going to have it. But when you start talking about, iron type materials and that, what are you seeing in that? Because I think that has a huge impact on communities.
Yeah, I mean, the ARPA funding has been great for water, wastewater, stormwater, and being able to knock off some of those high priority projects for a lot of these communities. But again, that comes into a push and pull about what you want to use that funding for, because the water, wastewater, stormwater is only one component of what that money can be used for. And there's communities out there that have been hurt in other ways. So some of the I've seen a lot of communities invest in their infrastructure using that funding. But now that that funding is getting in place and more projects are coming out, we're seeing the supply chain shortage really affect being able to get that construction done. Pipe, for instance, for water and sewer is in high demand right now, and there's a shortage of it. So we've been seeing kind of construction projects get pushed out, whether it, the intent was to start that project over the winter time, and now it's being pushed to the spring. We're already seeing that supply chain demand kind of crunch the ability to be able to complete that construction. I look at it on the roadway side. I know from personal experience that granite curb is hard to come by. And there's certain manufacturers that are only releasing a certain amount of granite curb. So you have to meet almost like a minimum threshold to be able to obtain any of that curb for any of your projects. So it's really an interesting time. Hopefully some of the supply chain shortage will kind of, work itself out over the winter months. But we have to go into 2022 assuming that it's still going to be an issue, and we have to figure out how to balance that.
Yeah, real quick, but before we get off the subject, we did have a town out here in Western Mass who was just in the newspaper talking about how they're afraid they're not going to be able to get plow parts for the wintertime. So if their plow parts and trucks break down, they're afraid they're not going to be able to get the parts to keep the trucks on the road to take care of snow in the winter. So pretty big problem.
Yeah, it's all a ripple effect, because then I even go a step further. So it's great you get more funding, and if you've had some of this backlog, now we've seen the traffic control being an issue, even and with issues with labor and otherwise, or we start talking about Art, you mentioned people testing positive, and all of a sudden now they aren't available, and you lose. It could happen to a crew, but it can also happen with traffic control. So that was something last year, I think, that we all fought. I don't want to say fought, well, we all dealt with, and departments dealt with, and towns dealt with. I think there's another one. We've seen more places starting to get more creative. Obviously some states very heavily use flaggers, and that has helped. Now we're seeing some of the towns are starting to get creative in terms of use of auxiliaries, whether it be retired officers or just a straight up auxiliary force just for traffic control. Even things with usage of other town employees, so fire departments and some of those type things. And that's all a ripple effect that is going to be very much needed if we start talking about this season, more funds, more projects and things going on. You have to have the staff out there for everything, not just the crews, but also the traffic control side of it as well.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Bob, because that was a big one for us. We had projects. I don't know if you had any, but we'd show up, get ready to do the project, and traffic control that was ordered just couldn't make it. They couldn't show up because they could not staff it. And unfortunately, they couldn't convey that message to us early enough. But I think that's going to be another major problem this year. And if towns, for the first time ever in my career working in Massachusetts, we were allowed to use flaggers in certain towns. And I think, getting people to help support these issues and come up with other solutions to keep the work going would benefit everybody.
So I get back to, like, obviously, our podcast is about roads and roads throughout New England. And I get back to how this all of this funding and all of this talk of, the infrastructure bill and, the supply chain demand, coming to a halt. How does that all tie back to the municipalities that we work with? And, one of the things that we have always promoted here is pavement preservation, and looking at how pavement preservation can help kind of maintain your road network. So, Bobby, how do you kind of see all of this kind of tied together and tying back to preservation or maintaining the infrastructure in general? To me, it's more about maintenance and looking at the opportunities for maintenance.
Absolutely. I think we've always talked about right treatment, right place, right time. And, never more important than when funding is short, that you want to be doing a treatment or doing the treatments that are most effective for what you have for roadways. It's kind of the classic fit, in terms of doing that, is to say, if we're most effectively using our dollars, then it helps you even more so than ever in tight times for funding. I think the other thing with a lot of the preservation type treatments is that they're quick in and outs too. So when we start talking about having a lot of projects going on, you're using less traffic control demands. You're not trying to stretch a project over the course of several weeks. A lot of times you're in and out in a day or two, and it doesn't have the drastic impact on a community. It also, to a certain extent, you have some additional flexibility in terms of your schedule, because again, with not having a project that is weeks long, with shorter days, even when you do have interruptions, it doesn't throw off things quite as much. So I think the biggest impact, and in Art, I think I certainly would like to hear your thoughts on it as well. But the biggest impact for me is that most cost effectively using your dollars just fits right into the whole concept of pavement preservation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was well said, Bobby. I don't have too much to add to that. I think as asphalt prices, go up, that becomes even more and more of a need to take on more preservation projects. And I like your comment about the quick in and out, because that's the truth. And that takes a lot of the resources off your traffic control issues that we saw so much in 2021.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing that I think we can consider with pavement preservation too is, with this infrastructure funding coming down, I've been talking to a lot of communities about, teeing up those projects and getting them ready. But, there are roadways out there that are right on the cusp of falling apart, and we don't know when that funding is coming into play. So I've been talking to a couple communities out there about, hey, do you want to figure out what treatment is available right now to be able to preserve that roadway? Because that funding may not come into your hands until 5, 7, 10 years down the line. So we think a lot of this funding through the federal level is going to go through a lot of existing programs, such as the TIP process, or MassWorks, or even on the water, sewer, stormwater side, the MVP program. So we think a lot of that funding is going to be filtered through those, but A, they're going to be competitive, and B, it's going to take a while to go through those processes. So how do we preserve the roadways in the condition that they're in until that money becomes available? So
yeah, it's a very good point. We look at the windows of opportunity, and that's huge, especially here in New England. It ties all back to that concept and extending pavement life. And so I agree with you. I think it's great to know that the additional funding's coming, but as we've seen, it unfortunately doesn't come quick enough, and you kind of have to plan for it accordingly.
Right. Well, like we said at the beginning of the episode, we're going to revamp this for the winter months of 2022. Our next episode, we're actually going to talk to Mark Valenti, who is going to talk. He's the operations manager for the town of Lexington. He's going to talk about winter maintenance with his roads. And in Lexington, we all know that they have done a ton of pavement preservation. So we want to talk to him about his processes and how he's, changed his processes since they started doing a lot of pavement preservation to be able to preserve and maintain that investment. So in addition, Bobby, you want to talk about some of the other topics that we're going to bring up as well?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot happening on the national level, which is exciting, and we've talked about there's some new preservation specs for the first time ever. AASHTO is releasing pavement preservation specs, which is a great thing for the industry as a whole, and the support of that. So I'm really looking forward to being able to hopefully bring some guests on and have them talk about that and how the impact to communities to bring some national exposure and some national backing to that. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. And Art, I think you also got some stuff on the preservation side with road resources we talked about.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. We're going to have the basically the inventors of the roadresource.org website on to talk about that website a little bit, how it came about, how towns and states can utilize it to help their road network. So it's going to be a really, really good session to have the people who created that website on to talk about it.
Great. With that, we'll close out this episode of New England Road Talk, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Take care.
Go and stay healthy.